Good evening, tonight. Allow your mind to drift far from the comforts of your bed and step quietly into a world that most have long tried to forget. A world of creaking scaffolds, hushed crowds, and the cold, steady rhythm of steel and wood under a gray morning sky. In this journey, you will slip behind the heavy oak doors of a medieval executioner's household. You will glimpse the daily labors, the hidden rituals, and the muted hum of a life set apart. A life that few envied, but many feared. As you listen, there is no need to stay sharply awake. You may find your thoughts wandering. Let them. You may drift away entirely. That is welcome to this story. Like the steady swing of a well-kept blade, will continue at its own measured pace, carrying you deeper into the folds of history, one quiet breath at a time. So settle in, feel the hush of the night around you, and imagine yourself not as a king or knight, but as an unseen figure standing in the shadows of a wooden platform, learning an ancient craft that no one dares to speak of aloud. Picture yourself standing in the chill of early dawn. The air is damp and lingers with the faint temps of freshly sawn timber and damp earth. Beneath your rough wool tunic, your hands are already raw from hauling planks and setting up the scaffold's beams. You are not the one who holds the blade. Not yet, but you are the one who must ready everything that blade will need. You are the apprentice, a young soul, drawn, or perhaps forced, into a profession that lingers at the edge of every town's whisper. Your master, the executioner, is a man of heavy silence and ritual precision. He does not shout, he does not boast. He shows you how to scrub the axe clean, how to check the rope for frays, how to measure the drop so that bone and rope do their grim work with no fuss, no spectacle beyond the necessary. Above you, the heavy beam waits, its timbers darkened by years of sun, rain, and the weight of many lives ended here beneath watchful eyes. Imagine yourself glancing at the rows of windows that edge the square. Even now, shutters crack open by degrees, cautious eyes peeking out to see if today the scaffold will wake from its quiet slumber. Some mornings, there is nothing more than the routine of care and cleaning, a quiet promise that today no one will climb those wooden steps. But on other mornings, a slow hum spreads through the town. Today, there will be a hanging, then letting it swing gently, like a pendulum marking the passing hours. You stand at the foot of the steps, hands clasped, tools at the ready should a knot slip or a beam need shoring up. The townsfolk gather early, soft crusts torn and shared among those who linger longer than they should. A woman clutches her shawl tighter as the breeze carries the faint scent of straw and hemp. For you, there is no thrill in their eyes, no sense of spectacle. Instead, there is the measured certainty that this is part of your world's turning a ritual as old as the square itself. You watch their faces. Some avert their gaze when they meet yours. Others stare a moment too long, as if trying to understand who you are beneath the plain linen cap, the simple tunic dusted with sawdust and rope fibers. The condemned arrives quietly, flanked by guards who speak in low, careful tones. There is no shouting, no pleas that pierce the hush. By now, the one who must climb the scaffold has made their peace or clings to a final, flickering hope that no last words will change. Your master speaks with them in the shadows behind the steps, words so soft you can only catch the gentle murmur of syllables, never their meaning. You stand near enough to hold the rope in your hands, to feel its faint twist beneath your palms. You check the knot, fingers nimble, precise. You learned long ago that a slip here would not mean mercy, but something slower, messier, an insult to your master's craft, a stain upon your quiet labor. When the moment comes, the square falls into a deeper stillness. Even the restless shifting of feet stops. A bird calls from a distant roofline, its cry thin against the hush. You feel the rough wood of the scaffolds railing under your fingertips as you stand aside. Watch your master take his place. He does not hurry, he does not drag time longer than needed. His movements are careful, respectful for the town, for the condemned, for the craft itself. You watch how he lays a steady hand on the shoulder of the one who stands at the edge. You watch how he tests the rope a final time, checks the drop, makes a quiet sign with his head to the guards below. Some linger a moment longer, eyes lingering on the stillness above the scaffold before they melt back into doorways and narrow lanes. You help your master lower the rope, untie what must be untied. The boards must be scrubbed clean, the straw gathered and burned, the knots checked and reset. You sweep the platform slowly, brush by brush, as the morning light grows brighter, almost indifferent to what has passed. There is no glory here, no thunder of drums or ringing of triumphant bells. There is only the steady beat of wood and rope, the quiet hum of a town that demands order and fears the cost of keeping it. And you, the apprentice, you stand at the scaffold's foot once more, a silent witness to a ritual older than these stones, older than the names you whisper when no one is listening. As the last traces of the morning drift into day, you feel the faint weight of the rope coiled over your shoulder, the soft pull of the scaffold's shadow at your back. You turn to the tools waiting on your workbench, and the square behind you slowly forgets what it saw until it must remember again. When you stand at the edge of the scaffold at dawn, you stand not just in the present, but in the lingering breath of all the mornings that came before. The square beneath your feet remembers. The stones hold secrets, whispered steps, muffled sobs. The scrape of boots that once climbed these same steps under the same pale sky. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the soft clatter of a tavern door as an early drinker stumbles out to watch from the shadows. Your hands work on habit alone. They coil rope over your arm, test the knots you practiced in the quiet corners of the workroom. You learned each knot by heart long before you ever saw them used in the square loops that tighten, loops that hold, loops that give way with a single sharp tug. Your fingers know them better than they know your own name spoken aloud in town. And around you, the town stirs in its careful way. A merchant lifts a shutter with a wooden groan, peers out with eyes still soft from sleep. A mother hushes her children inside, though you see their wide eyes peering from behind her skirts. For some, the day's work cannot wait for the scaffold silence to settle once more. Bread must be baked, animals tended, stalls opened with the creak of old hinges. But still, a thin line of townsfolk gathers. They come not out of cruelty alone, though some come for that too, but out of the need to see the ritual done, to be reminded that rules have teeth and silence can be enforced with rope and timber. They stand in small knots, boots muddy from the thawing morning, breath puffing into the gray air like so many small drifting clouds. Near the scaffold's steps, you catch the faint scent of straw, freshly laid beneath the platform to soften what must fall. You feel the texture of the rope, rough hemp sliding between your thumb and palm. And you glance at your master as he inspects the beams for the third, then fourth time. He does not rush. Each glance, each tug on the ropes is a quiet promise that nothing here will betray its purpose. The condemned arrives with little noise. No cart rolls through the crowd. No chains rattle in some grand show of punishment. Instead, it is a slow shuffle of feet, the soft clink of iron at wrists, the murmur of guards whose breath smells faintly of ale and sleep. Sometimes the condemned looks at you, sometimes they do not. Some eyes hold defiance, others a pale sheen of disbelief, a quiet plea that drifts into the cold air and dissolves before it reaches your ears. And you stand there, apprentice's rope still looped on your arm, eyes lowered, yet always watching. You study the angle of the master's shoulders, the measured calm of his voice as he offers the final words to the one about to climb the steps. It is not mercy, nor cruelty, just the last scrap of dignity given before the hush settles deeper over the square. The townsfolk stand close now. You see the shifting of boots on cold stone, the soft coughs, the shuffle of a child moved behind a parent's coat. No one speaks above a whisper. The scaffold demands quiet in a way that even the church bell cannot. When the time comes, you feel it in your bones before you see it. A ripple moves through the small crowd, a tightening of breath, a subtle leaning forward, the sudden stillness of feet that moments ago shifted in the frost. The rope, which felt so ordinary in your hands moments ago, now carries a weight you can sense without lifting it at all. Your master climbs the steps first. His boots creak on the planks you checked just yesterday. Each nail you drove in with careful strikes holds now, steady beneath the weight of this moment. The condemned follows with steps that seem both too slow and far too quick. You stand at the base, eyes following the rope as it drapes from beam to neck, your own breath held as if to keep the moment suspended just a heartbeat longer. There is no speech for the crowd, only the faint rustle of winter coats, the distant crackle of straw underfoot. Sometimes a word is offered when the crowds have vanished, when the scaffold stands clean under an empty sky. Your world folds inward again. The square that felt so vast under so many eyes becomes small once more, no bigger than the hush of your master's workroom, the flicker of a single candle, the steady hush of your own breath as you step through the heavy wooden door and leave the open air behind. Imagine yourself there, standing just inside the threshold. The air is warmer here, thick with the scent of oil, old leather, and the faint temps of iron that lingers in every corner of this hidden place. Shadows gather in the beams overhead, softening the shapes of blades and ropes that hang neatly on the walls. It is here, behind shuttered windows and a latched door, that your real lessons begin. You learn early that there are things spoken openly in the square, the measurements, the ropes, the swing of a blade, and things spoken only here, in whispers and nods, passed from master to apprentice, as they have been for generations. You learn that precision is mercy, that a blade sharpened well is a promise kept quietly to the one who must kneel at dawn. You learn how each knot has a name, each loop a purpose, each drop a calculation that must be trusted. Your master shows you the quiet signs he makes before his hand touches the rope. Small gestures, so subtle the townsfolk never see them. A tap of the finger against the beam, a slight shift of his boot at the platform's edge, an old prayer murmured under his breath, half in Latin, half in words that carry no name anymore. yet settle in your bones like an old lullaby you dare not forget. There are other secrets, too. Small tokens kept in a chest beneath the workbench, smooth river stones, said to hold a blessing against restless dreams. A scrap of cloth tied with twine, tucked between the ledgers that record names and sums and dates that no one beyond this room will ever read. These things are not written in any ledger. They belong to the craft's quiet undercurrent, a hedge against the weight of memory that might otherwise follow you home each night. By the hearth, you sit with your master when the night grows long and the embers crackle low. He sharpens a blade with a whetstone that sings softly under his steady hand. You watch the sparks slip away like tiny falling stars. Between the rasp of stone and steel, he tells you the old stories, not the ones the townsfolk whisper, but the ones buried beneath those rumors, like stones beneath straw. He tells you how your craft once answered, not just the law, but the will of kings and priests alike. How an executioner's steady hands kept kingdoms from fraying when words alone could not bind them tight. He tells you how some called men like him God's iron, yet turned their faces when he passed in the street. How some would slip him a coin in secret to be sure the blade fell swift and clean, while others spat at his boots, yet came to his door when they needed an end no judge would sign. In this hush, you begin to understand that what you hold is not only a trade, but a quiet inheritance. Each knot tied, each blade cleaned and laid back in its chest is a small vow to stand between the order of the square and the chaos that stirs when law is left to words alone. And still, there are things you will not speak aloud, small superstitions that cling like burrs to the edges of your days. A coin slipped into your boot before the scaffold is built. A sprig of rosemary hung above the threshold to keep the worst dreams from following you into sleep. A silent promise, whispered under your breath, that you will not let the rope fray, nor the blade grow dull, nor the steps groan too loud when dawn comes. At times, as the fire cracks and the hour grows late, you wonder if these rituals are anything more than habit. Yet you do not dare test their absence. You learn to accept that this hidden knowledge is yours alone to carry forward. Someday, perhaps, you will pass it to another, an apprentice who will stand where you stand now, listening in the hush, learning in the soft flicker of lamplight. And when the last ember fades, when the tools are laid to rest for the night, you slip to your narrow bed beneath the low beams. You close your eyes and feel the faint hum of these old secrets settle into your bones, a quiet promise that come morning you will rise once more to lift the hammer, measure the rope, check the blade's edge in the cold dawn light. You drift, then, between sleep and waking, carrying the hush of this hidden craft with you, like a secret folded beneath your breath. When the scaffold is silent, and the square drifts back to its hum of gossip and market stalls, you slip through the narrow lanes behind the workroom. The noise of the town falls away with every step, replaced by the muffled hush of your own footfalls on damp cobblestones. The small wooden door ahead leans slightly on its hinges, not enough to keep out the world, but enough to remind you that this place is set apart. Inside, the hush is almost a living thing. The workroom is not large, but it feels deeper than its walls. Shadows cling to the beams overhead, pooling in corners where coils of rope hang neatly from wooden pegs. Tools glint softly in the lantern light, not just blades and whetstones, but chisels for the scaffold joints, mallets for the stakes, iron rings for the bindings that must hold firm under the watching eyes of the square. In this quiet, you learn the parts of the craft no one in the square would ever. When you sit by the hearth, half wrapped in your master's stories, you begin to understand that you do not stand alone beneath the hanging beam. Beyond the square, beyond the scaffold's timbers, and the quiet ring of steel on stone, there is a thin, unbroken thread that binds you to others, men and women you will never meet, yet whose shadow lies over your shoulder each time you check the rope at dawn. Imagine yourself in a small cottage tucked at the town's edge, candlelight flickering through oiled parchment windows. This is not the workroom. This is the place where your master's family gathers when the day's tools are set aside. Here, the hush is different, softer, warmed by low voices, the smell of bread baking, the quiet clatter of spoons in bowls of broth. The children of the executioner know the scaffolds wait long before they can lift a hammer or tie a knot. They hear it in the soft conversations between parents when they think small ears do not listen. They see it in the way the townsfolk step aside in the market, in the way a coin changes hands in silence at the butcher's stall. They feel it in the way their father's boots leave muddy prints by the door on days when the square remembers his craft. Some will turn away when they are grown, finding distant roads that promise a name untouched by the hush of rope and blade. Some, though, will stay, as you have stayed. And so the line continues, quiet and unspoken, moving through time like a hidden current beneath calm water. Your master may speak little of family in daylight hours, but in the hush of the hearth you catch glimpses. He tells you how his father taught him to measure a drop by the height of a man's shoulders, not by the weight of a name on paper. He tells you how his mother wrapped herbs in linen bundles and hung them by the workroom door to keep the worst memories at bay. He tells you how an uncle vanished when the scaffold was torn down, the rope burned in the square by townsfolk who believed they would never need such tools again, only to build it anew years later when the world forgot its promises. There are old stories, too, carried like embers from generation to generation. Tales of executioners' daughters who married blacksmiths and kept the blade sharp by night when no one was looking. Stories of sons who fled across borders but found that the hush followed them all the same questions, the same stares, the same coin pressed in secret for work no one else would touch. At the small table near the fire, you sometimes share a meal with your master's kin, bread torn in rough halves, cheese sliced with the same calm precision that keeps the scaffold true. The children glance at you shyly, eyes wide, fingers sticky with crumbs. They do not fear you. To them, you are simply another pair of hands that tends the tools, sweeps the yard, mends the hinges on the door when the wind rattles it loose. Yet even here, where warmth softens the edges of your days, the trade is never truly left behind. Over the hearth hangs a blade older than your master, its edge dulled long ago, but kept polished all the same, a quiet relic, a reminder that this line does not break because someone decided it should not. It holds because someone must hold it, generation after generation, even when the square looks away. Sometimes, when the youngest child asks you what you do all day, you tell them of rope and wood and the careful checking of knots. You speak softly of tools that must be ready, of timber that must not splinter under cold morning rain. You do not speak of the hush that comes when the crowd gathers, nor the moment when the rope grows heavy. These are truths for another day, when small shoulders are broad enough to bear the weight. And when you rise from the hearth, when you step once more into the night's cool breath, you carry the quiet hum of that family with you. You feel it settle like a cloak across your shoulders, a reminder that your hands do not steady the scaffold alone, that somewhere in other towns, down other narrow lanes, by other hearths where blades rest above warming stones, other hands keep this same hush alive. You stand a moment in the yard before you return to your narrow loft. The moon drifts above the rooftops, pale and indifferent. The square sleeps behind you, its stones cold and waiting, and you carry forward the line that does not break, because it must not, because someone must stand where you stand when the rope is needed again. When you pause in the hush of the workroom's shadows, it is easy to believe you stand alone. But step beyond the timber walls into the small courtyard behind the house, and you see how your life is knotted into others, a quiet tangle of names, faces, footsteps in the mud that do not wash away with the rain. In the evenings, when your chores are done, you follow the small worn path that leads to the dwelling where your master's family gathers under a low roof of thatch and old beams. The door creaks when you lift the latch, a familiar sound, soft as an old friend's voice. Inside, warmth greets you first, the low crackle of the hearth, the fragrant drift of onions simmering with broth, the muted laughter of children who know only part of what this house carries. Imagine yourself slipping off your boots near the threshold, setting aside the rope coiled over your shoulder. Your hands still bear the faint bite of hemp fibers, the smell of oil that clings to the cuffs of your tunic. But here, no one flinches at the scent. No one turns away from your shadow as they do in the square. Here, you are not the half-visible figure at the scaffold's foot. You are simply another pair of hands welcomed to the table. The family of an executioner lives between two worlds, one of whispered fear beyond the door, and one of quiet routine within it. The children sprawl near the hearth, tracing shapes in the ashes with small, grubby fingers. A mother lifts a steaming pot, ladling broth into rough clay bowls. The master sits at the table's far end, boots planted wide, his broad hands resting palm down on the scarred wood as he listens for news from a cousin in the next town, or a brother who writes only by lantern light. You learn, in these long evenings, how the craft passes not only through blades and ropes, but through lullabies half sung over a cradle, through old stories shared while mending torn sleeves by firelight. The children know not to ask too many questions, but they know enough. They know why their father keeps his boots by the back door, why a coil of rope rests beneath the bed in a wooden chest lined with straw. They know the hush that settles over the room when the talk drifts too close to the square's stone heart. And you, the apprentice, you listen more than you speak. You learn how the line has survived storms of rumor, riots that saw the scaffold torn apart plank by plank, threats scrawled in chalk on the workshop door. You hear how families once changed their names, crossed borders, bent their titles into softer shapes, but never fully stepped away from the craft. There is a comfort in these stories, despite their weight. They remind you that your quiet labor is not a solitary penance, but part of something older, broader, a thread of necessity no king or council has yet dared to sever for good. When the scaffold falls silent for a year, or 10, or 20, someone keeps the tools dry, someone keeps the blade oiled, someone waits, because they know the world's order always Step quietly now beyond the scaffold's shadow, beyond the hush of the workshop and the warmth of the hearth. Follow the narrow streets that wind through crooked rows of timber-bird houses, past shuttered windows and low doorways swept clean each dawn. Here in these winding alleys, the truth of your trade is both hidden and never truly gone, a secret known by all, yet spoken by none. Imagine yourself drifting through the marketplace at first light. Stalls creak open under the hands of early merchants, fresh bread laid out in neat rows, root vegetables piled in rough wicker baskets, still damp with soil. You feel the warmth of fresh loaves, the faint sweetness of bruised apples, the cool brush of morning air as you pass through the edges of the town's waking life. And yet you sense the hush just beneath these familiar sounds. A fishmonger's eyes slide past you as you pass. A butcher's apprentice, no older than you were when you first lifted a hammer to the scaffold's boards, pauses his work, his knife resting against the wooden block as he watches you from the corner of his eye. You nod once. He looks away, pretending to inspect the string of sausages hanging above his stall. It is not fear alone that makes them look away, nor is it cruelty. It is something older, an understanding as old as the square's worn stones. The townsfolk know the scaffold stands because they wish it to stand. They know the rope is measured, the blade is kept sharp, because the hush that follows keeps their world in its fragile balance. You see it in small gestures, in the baker's wife who leaves a heel of bread near the workshop door when the winter winds howl too sharply through the yard, in the cobbler who fixes your boots each autumn but says nothing of the straw caught in the laces, the faint mark of rope fibers on your cuffs, in the market crier who calls out news of taxes and harvests, but never names what happens when the square grows silent and the scaffold stands awake. There is a quiet pact between you and them, a pact of deliberate forgetting. They do not ask how the rope is tied. They do not wish to see your hands brush the edge of the blade as you carry it wrapped in cloth through back lanes at dawn. They do not ask where the tools are kept, nor how the final knots are tested by candlelight when no one is watching. And in return, you ask nothing from them but this, their silence, their willingness to turn their eyes away when you pass, their quiet acceptance that this hush you tend is for them, not only for you, a hush that keeps the square orderly, the whispers soft, the debts paid in shadows rather than chaos. Sometimes, in the hum of late afternoon, you catch pieces of this silent agreement at work. Two men lean over an ale barrel outside the tavern, voices pitched low. Their words drift to your ear on the breeze. The scaffold, the master, the next name. When they see you near, the words die on their tongues. One lifts a hand in half-greeting, not quite respect, not quite shame, and you nod back, boots brushing through the spilled grain at the tavern's door. Children know this hush in their own way. They dare one another to tap the scaffold's steps when it stands empty, to climb halfway up and flee shrieking in the dusk, laughter echoing through the narrow streets. Their parents scold them, hush them home, but never truly forbid the game, as if reminding themselves that the scaffold belongs not to the apprentice or the master alone, but to all who gather when the square calls. At times, you wonder how deep this pact runs. If behind shuttered windows, heads bend close to plan which names might someday find their place in the master's ledger. If silver passes hand to hand beneath the table's edge in the town, when dawn breaks, your first duty is not to the scaffold's cold planks, nor to the silent square, that waits beyond the yard. Your first duty is to the tools, the simple, quiet shapes that make your trade possible, that hum softly beneath your hands as if they 2. Carry secrets you must learn to keep. Imagine the small workroom in the hush before sunrise. The single candle flickers on the scarred table where your master once laid each piece in a neat row the first day you arrived. You remember how your fingers hovered above the blade, the rope, the wooden blocks smoothed by years of steady use. You remember how heavy each felt in your palm, heavier than you thought simple wood or hemp could be. You start with the blade. Always the blade. Its edge must be clean, not just sharp, but clear of any stain that might cling to it like an echo. You lift it from its chest, wrapped in oiled cloth that smells faintly of old iron and faint candle smoke. You feel its weight settle into your wrist, balanced and sure. By the hearth, you set a small wet stone at your knee. You wet its surface with a few drops from a battered jug, listening to the slow drip of water onto stone. Then you draw the blade across it, once, twice, 3 times, in a rhythm so familiar your hands could follow it, even in sleep. The rasp is gentle, almost a lullaby in itself. Steel meeting stone, whispering secrets that have passed from master to apprentice for more years than the square remembers. When the edge glints in the candlelight, you touch the flat of the steel to your thumb. Never the edge, never careless. You know how quickly even a small slip can mark a hand meant only to steady, not to cut. Next comes the rope. Coarse hemp, thick enough to hold what it must hold, soft enough to knot and unknot when the moment demands it. You uncoil it slowly, feeling the faint scratch of fibers against your skin. You run your palm along its length, seeking any fray, any hidden weakness that could betray the scaffold when all eyes are turned to you and the master standing above. Sometimes you find a flaw, a single strand, weakened by damp or worryingly thin where it should be firm. When you do, you cut it away with a small blade kept for this purpose alone. You coil the good rope neatly beside you, splicing fresh lengths if needed. Measuring by the same rough stretch of your arm your master taught you long ago. The smell of hemp lingers on your fingertips long after you lay the rope back in its chest. It mingles with the faint oil from the blade, the scent of old timber that always drifts through the workroom's walls when the wind hums low through the yard. And then there is the wood, the quiet heart of the scaffold, the beams, the planks, the steps that creak under boots when the square holds its breath. You tend the wood as carefully as the steel or rope. You run a rough cloth over the planks stacked along the workroom wall. You check each joint for signs of rot that might spread beneath the paint of tar and oil. When a post splinters, you sand it smooth by hand. Slow strokes, small curls of shavings drifting to the floor where they gather like whispers waiting to be swept away. You test each peg that holds the scaffold's frame steady against wind and weight. A loose peg is no small thing. It can shift the way the drop falls, the way the square remembers what happened that day beneath its waiting sky. Sometimes, late in the hush of night, you catch yourself speaking softly to these tools as you tend them, not words of praise or fear, but small murmurs of habit. A thank you to the blade for staying true, a quiet promise to the rope to keep its secrets well, a slow nod to the wood that holds steady even when boots pound across its length in the hush of dawn. You know each nick in the blade's spine, You know each faint knot in the rope's coil. You know where the scaffold's lowest plank dips just slightly under a master's step. These are small truths few would see, yet they hold your trade together like stitches in an old cloth, fragile if left untended, strong enough to carry a town's hush if you care for them each day. So you wake each morning in the gray half-light, candle guttering low, breath misting the cold air. You kneel by your tools as you always do, and you run your hands over steel, rope, and wood, the quiet trinity that binds you to this craft, that binds the square to its unspoken order, that binds the hush around your shoulders like a cloak no crowd can see. When the last check is done, when the blade rests ready in its cloth, the rope coiled neat as a promise, the planks stacked straight against the dawn's soft chill, only then do you rise, stretch your back, gather your tools to your chest, and step out into the yard once more. The scaffold stands waiting, the square slumbers on, and you carry steel, rope, and wood beneath your arms like old friends who trust you to hold their secrets in silence until the hush calls for them to speak again. Long before the townsfolk gather at the edge of the square, long before whispers coil around the scaffold's beams like ivy in the dusk, you stand alone in the hush, rope in hand, eyes tracing silent numbers in the grain of timber and stone. Imagine yourself there at first light, the world still wrapped in a pale mist that blurs rooftops and softens the edges of every sound. The rope rests coiled over your shoulder, its weight familiar now, like an old promise pressed gently against your bones. Your master taught you early, the drop is not guesswork. It is not left to chance or hurried choice when dawn's hush gathers around the scaffold's base. It is a quiet science learned in steps, one measured foot at a time, one silent mark on a timber post where the shadow falls in the same place each morning. You begin by measuring the height of the beam, the crossbar of oak, darkened by years of sun and rain, polished in places where the rope runs smooth in its final moment of work. You check the knots again, running the coarse strands through your fingers. Then you stand back, eyes moving from the beam above to the ground below. You pace out the distance from plank to stone, boots scuffing over straw left behind from the night's sweep. You test the boards with your heel, checking for the faint dip where weight will gather when the crowd holds its breath. It is simple in its way, yet never simple enough to be careless. Too short a drop, and the rope fails its purpose, turning hush to horror, turning order to rumor that clings to your name for years to come. Too long a drop, and the hush breaks open in another way, rougher, messier than any crowd will bear in silence. So you measure twice, sometimes 3 times. A length of rope stretched beside the scaffold's edge, its tail brushing the cold stones that hold the square's old stories. You mark the line with chalk, a small white whisper that will vanish when rain comes, but hold steady long enough to guide your master's final nod. Some mornings, your master stands beside you, boots planted firm on the scaffold's planks. He watches you count the knots in the rope, watches you test the hemp's twist by tugging gently against its anchored end. He does not speak much, a nod here, a low hum of approval when you recite the numbers he once recited to his own master. On mornings just like this, under skies just as gray, you learn to see these numbers not only in rope and beam, but in the quiet curve of a shoulder, the way weight settles in the bones of the condemned. You read their posture like a silent story. You measure more than inches, more than stone and timber. You measure the hush that must hold when the rope does its final work. Sometimes you find yourself tracing the same figures in the dirt when no one watches, your fingertip looping through invisible numbers that keep you steady when sleep drifts close. But the hush must still be kept. You practice the sums in your head as you polish the blade, as you sweep the yard clean, as you stand in the shadows behind your master while the square grows still. This quiet science is not written in any book the townsfolk might borrow from the church or the scribe's shelf. It lives only here, between your hands and the rope, between the ledger's rough pages and the hush that gathers when your master lays. When the measurements are made, the rope checked, the beam tested for its old creaks and murmurs, you coil the length neatly beside the scaffold's post. You sweep away your chalk marks with the flat of your palm, and when you step back at last, boots planted firm on the same stones where the town will stand soon enough, you feel a quiet pride slip through your chest, a promise to your master, to the craft. Not every dawn calls for the scaffold to wake. Some days the rope stays coiled on its hook, the blade sleeps wrapped in its oiled cloth, and the square hums with only the soft rustle of merchants setting up their stalls and children chasing the drifting leaves along the worn cobblestones. On these days, your boots still find their way across the yard at first light. The workroom door still creaks open beneath your hand, but the hush is lighter now. Not the tense, waiting hush that clings to rope and timber when the square must remember its oldest promise, but the gentler hush of a trade that knows how to rest when the hour allows it. You begin with small tasks, a loose hinge on the workroom's back door, oiled and tapped straight with careful blows of the mallet. A missing latch on the storage chest, mended with a sliver of new oak cut from an offcut, saved for just such small repairs. The soft rasp of the plane across the wood soothes you, each curl of shavings drifting to the floor, like quiet reminders that not every hour is heavy with the scaffold's weight. By mid-morning, you find your way to the garden patch behind the yard. There, you kneel among rows of stubborn herbs and low vegetables that cling to the soft earth like secrets half buried. You turn the soil with your hands, breaking clods and lifting small stones from roots that wind through the rich darkness. You press your thumb against tender shoots, testing for signs of frostbite when winter breathes too close. Sometimes, a neighbor's child leans over the low fence, wide-eyed at the sight of the apprentice who stands so near the scaffold by dawn, but kneels now in the damp earth, dirt smudged on his sleeves like any other gardener tending green stems that bend toward the sun. The child says nothing, only watches you pull weeds from between the mint and rosemary, fingers gentle, movements slow. In the warm hours, after noon, you might find yourself inside again, seated at the rough work table beneath the window where the light slants in just so. You polish the buckles that fasten the master's boots. You test the hinges of a small iron chest that holds the ledgers no townsfolk will ever read. You brush dust from the old whetstone, running your fingertip along its smooth face as if to remind yourself that even when idle, the edge must always be ready. If the square hums with laughter and trade, you hear it through the open shutter. The ring of hammer on anvil from the smithy, the rhythmic slap of dough on a baker's broad table, a snatch of song from the washerwomen at the stream's edge, carried in on the breeze with the soft scent of soap and wet linen drying in the pale sun. In these ordinary hours, the hush you keep feels different, no less yours, but softer around the edges. A hush that folds itself into the scrape of broom bristles across the yard's stones. The creak of your boots as you carry a bundle of fresh straw to lay beneath the scaffold's posts, so damp, does not creep too high into the timbers. You might pause to mend your own tunic where the cuff has worn thin from rope fibers pulling at the weave. You might patch a hole in your boot sole with scrap leather traded quietly from the cobbler, who asks no questions, only hands you the piece with a nod, as if this exchange, too, is part of the hush the town keeps around you. When dusk drifts close, the square softens again. Stalls folded shut, doors drawn in tight against the coming chill. You sweep the yard once more, gather the last stray splinters into a neat pile by the workroom door. You lean your broom against the scaffold's lowest post, run your palm along the beam's old grain, feeling how even when it sleeps, it remembers the weight it must bear when the hush grows deep again, and you, you breathe out the day's quiet labor, boots scuffing over the threshold as you step inside. The tools rest where they should, the rope coiled like a sleeping serpent in its chest. The blade lies folded in its cloth, its promise waiting, unspoken, but never far. These ordinary hours remind you that your craft is not only the rope or the drop or the hush that binds a square of stone together in silence. It is also this, the small repairs, the patient tending of soil, the soft scrape of a whetstone that keeps its edge even when no one is watching. You carry that quiet with you to your narrow bed. The hush follows you as your eyes drift closed. A softer hush now, a hush that lets the square sleep undisturbed for a little while longer. There are mornings when you wake before the town's first cry, and you know, even before your boots touch the cold floor, that today the rope will stay resting in its chest and the scaffold's beams will stand empty, a quiet stage without an audience. You pull on your tunic in the hush of your loft. Your fingertips brush the window's edge where a draft slips through the frame, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke from distant hearths. You listen for footsteps in the yard below, but hear none yet. Only the slow stretch of silence that means the master, too, knows today holds no waiting crowd. Down in the workroom, you strike a taper, let its flame catch the dark corners and sweep away the last curl of sleep from your eyes. The blade stays wrapped in its oiled cloth tonight. Instead, you kneel by the chest at the back wall, the chest that holds more than rope and ledgers. Here are scraps of leather, spare hinges, bits of wax for mending lantern seams that drip when the wind rattles the shutters too hard. You choose small tasks first. They anchor you to the hush in a way the scaffold's heavy shadow cannot. You brush oil onto the workroom's hinges so they swing in silence. When winter's breath makes the wood swell, you carve a splintered peg into a new shape, your knife following the grain with careful patience. The curl of shavings tumbles to the floor like thin ribbons. When the sun lifts itself higher, you step into the yard with a broom in your hands. The stones remember your steps by now. They bear the faint smudge of old boots and the soft scrape of straw bristles that pass over them day after day. You sweep in long, measured arcs, gathering fallen leaves, bits of straw, small pieces of grit that cling stubbornly in the cracks. Sometimes you pause with your broom resting against your shoulder, letting your eyes drift across the scaffold's base. It stands there, simple wood and iron, just another shape against the sky, when no rope swings, when no hush curls, sharp as a blade through the square. On these days, it feels almost kind, a frame of timber waiting patiently for the next time the town calls it back to waking. Beyond the yard's low fence, the town hums on. A boy calls for a stray goat in the lane behind the tannery. A cluster of girls kneels by the pump, sleeves rolled high as they scrub the morning's wash in icy water. The soft slap of cloth against stone drifts on the breeze, mixing with the faint smell of soap, the warmth of bread pulled fresh from the baker's oven. In these ordinary hours, you slip away from the scaffold's edge to blend for a moment with that quiet life. Sometimes you stand in the doorway of the cobbler's narrow shop, waiting as he measures the worn sole of your boot against a fresh scrap of hide. He does not ask what wears them down so fast. He does not meet your eyes for too long, but he does not look away either. He takes the coin you offer. There remains another part of the craft that never fully rests, a hush not built of wood or iron, but of ink, parchment, and the steady scratch of a quill in the soft glow of lamplight. Before you, spread flat on the table's worn planks, lies the master's ledger, its binding cracked at the corners, its pages thick with the faint must of old parchment and candle smoke. By the ledger's edge sits a small pot of ink, dark as the hush itself, and the quill your master once cut for you with his own knife, the nib shaped just so the lines do not blot or run when you lean close to write. You open the ledger gently, mindful of the brittle edges where the parchment has yellowed over winters older than you can remember. Names wait for you there, neat rows of them, each a soft whisper of a life folded into a single line of ink, a date, a place, a small note in the margin that only your master fully understands, a mark of coin paid, of order kept, of the hush held steady on a cold dawn. Your hand moves slowly, tracing the shape of each letter, the careful curl of a name you never spoke aloud when the scaffold stood awake. Some you remember, clear as your own reflection in a dark window. Some drift from your memory the moment your quill lifts from the page. Each entry binds the scaffold to the square, the rope to the hush that settles like mist between the stones. Without the ledger, the names might slip away into rumor and soft-footed gossip whispered at the tavern's back door. But here, in this hush of ink and quiet breath, they remain, not celebrated, not mourned, simply kept. Sometimes, in the hush of these pages, you find old entries penned in a hand you do not know. Your master's father, perhaps, or his father's before him, their careful letters slanting just so in the dim candlelight of another workroom in another age. You run your fingertip along those lines, feeling how each stroke of ink holds steady the same hush you guard now. You learn to read more than the words, a blot of ink where a name wavered before it found its place on the page, a slip of the quill where an old master's breath caught, or the wind rattled the shutter, or the hush in the square wavered for just a heartbeat too long. Beside the ledger sits a small box of sand for blotting ink before it runs, a trick your master taught you in your first winter when your fingers stiffened in the cold and your lines smeared under the candle's flicker. You remember his voice then, low and patient, as he showed you how to sprinkle the grains just so, then lift them away with the edge of your sleeve before they left the page, gritty and uneven. When your task is done, you close the ledger's cover with care. You wrap its leather tie snug around its spine, slip it back into the chest beneath the work table where the rope and spare hemp rest, coiled and quiet. There, among the tools that hold the square's hush in timber and knot, the names wait, pressed between pages that no one else will read but you, your master, and the hush itself. Tracing the hush you kept in silence, never knowing the sound of your breath in the cold dawn light, if only in the careful curl of a name that slips away each time you close the page. Long after the scaffold's beams have been brushed clean, long after the rope has been coiled into its chest and the last faint echo of boots on stone has drifted away down the narrow lanes, the hush remains tucked neatly between two leather covers, waiting in the ledger that never sleeps. You sit before it in the quiet of the workroom, shoulders rounded over the low table, breath misting in the draft that seeps through the shutter's worn frame. The candle burns low, its wax softening into a pale pool that flickers against the brass inkwell's rim. Its faint scent, warm tallow, old wick, blends with the dry perfume of parchment and the sharper tanks of iron tools resting close by. The spine sighs open, the thick pages rustling like dry reeds in a winter wind. Each one bears marks older than you, marks left by the master before you, and the master before him. Names laid down like stepping stones through time, each pressed gently into the hush that binds this trade to the square outside. Your quill rests between your fingers, its nib honed to a fine edge, its shaft smoothed by the press of your thumb over countless nights like this. You dip it into the ink pot, watch the black bead gather, hold your breath just a moment before the tip finds the page. You write slowly. You do not rush the hush. Each name deserves its space. A place, a sum of coin noted in the margin where only your master's eye will linger long enough to read. Some names you remember clearly, the tilt of a head, the shape of a coat collar brushing against the rope's twist, the soft catch of breath when boots touched timber for the last time. Others blur together, drifting at the edge of your memory like the mist that gathers near the well at dawn. Faint shapes, half remembered, and then gone the moment your quill lifts from the parchment's edge. Sometimes your master sits across from you as you write. He leans back in his chair, boots resting firm on the flagstone floor, one hand cupped around a tin mug still warm from the hearth. He does not read the words aloud. He does not speak the names. He only watches the steady flow of ink, nodding once when the line curls true and the hush is kept unbroken in the gentle scratch of the quill's tip. You pause between lines to sprinkle sand over fresh ink, a handful of pale grains that whisper across the page as they catch the moisture, drawing it out so no careless sleeve might blur the hush you guard. When you tilt the ledger, the sand slips away in a soft rush, leaving the black strokes clear and sharp against the yellowed skin of the page. Your eyes drift sometimes to the older pages, buried further back in the ledger's spine. There you find unfamiliar hands, letters that lean too far left or stand too stiff and square to be your master's mark. These pages feel heavier beneath your fingertips, as if the hush thickens the deeper you read. You trace the loops of a name signed decades ago, a soft indent left by a long-dead quill that pressed just a touch too firmly on a damp night when the candle flickered and the wind knocked at the shutter like an old memory come calling. Sometimes you wonder what stories those names carried with them, what debts were paid, what silences traded for the hush that settled over the square when the scaffold woke at dawn. You imagine a boy much like you, shoulders hunched against the cold, eyes squinting in lamplight, dipping his quill into the same inkwell, his breath misting the page as he laid down each name with the same quiet care. You learn that the ledger is not only a record, it is a binding in itself, a thread that loops the scaffold's hush around every stone in the square, every timber beam that bears the rope's weight. Without it, the hush would slip too easily into rumor and half-remembered stories told wrong by alehouse fires. With it, the hush holds firm, the rope's purpose made clear not by shout or trumpet or church bell, but by the soft scratch of quill on parchment, a name remembered only by the page, the chest, the apprentice who lifts the cover when the square drifts to sleep. When your work is done, you blot the last line dry with gentle hands. You blow out the taper, watch its smoke curl into the rafters like a final whisper that lingers long after the flame has died. You wrap the ledger's leather tie snug, its spine pressing softly against your palm as you carry it back to its chest, the same chest where the rope sleeps. The spare knots rest in neat coils, The blade waits wrapped in cloth beside small scraps of oilcloth and stray bits of sand for blotting tomorrow's ink. You close the chest with a quiet click, the hush settling around you like a warm cloak against the chill of the workroom stones. And as you climb the narrow steps to your loft, boots thudding softly in the hush, you carry each name with you, not loud enough to weigh your sleep, but soft enough to remind you, even in dreams, that what the rope begins, the ledger must always hold. Some mornings, when the hush deepens and the rope is ready, the square remembers its oldest shape, not just stones beneath boots or timber beams creaking in the cold, but a quiet stage where the whole town gathers to hold its breath. Imagine yourself standing at the scaffold's base, just as dawn slips into pale daylight. The first clatter of cartwheels rolls past the far edge of the square. A cockerel calls from somewhere behind a shuttered window. The air tastes faintly of damp earth and ashes. The scent of fires banked low all through the night to warm restless sleepers who now stir awake to whispers carried on chill morning air. One by one they come, drifting in small clusters from narrow lanes and crooked alleys, wrapped in cloaks pulled tight at the throat, boots leaving soft marks in the straw scattered to hush the echo of footsteps. They speak little at first, heads bent close as they gather near the scaffold's edge, but careful not to stand too near the beams. You stand just apart, your rope coiled neatly over your arm, your boots planted firm where the boards meet stone. You watch them without truly watching, letting your gaze slip over faces you half know by sight, but rarely by name. There is the old baker's wife, shawl drawn so high her mouth is hidden, only her eyes showing above the frayed wool. She nods once when she catches your glance, a small greeting that says, "I see you," but says nothing more. Beside her, a butcher's boy shifts from foot to foot, knuckles brushing the small knife strapped at his hip, an old habit, though the knife will stay sheathed today. Near the square's far edge, a young girl clutches her mother's hand, her eyes wide and fixed on the scaffold's rough planks. She will be lifted away before the hush grows deepest, her mother's thumb brushing her cheek, murmuring that she must look instead at the church steeple rising pale against the dawn. But for now, the child's eyes rest on the beam above your head, as if trying to measure its quiet promise for herself. Merchants stand a little further back, boots clean, cloaks lined with fine fur. They do not speak. They nod to one another, low murmurs drifting from beneath bristled beards and heavy collars. They have paid their share in taxes and silence alike, and now they stand witness, not out of hunger for spectacle, but because the square expects them to remember what hush costs when spoken in timber and rope. Some linger near the scaffold's corner, the curious, the restless, those whose tongues twist rumor into stories that ripple through tavern walls at night. They lean close to one another, breath rising in pale puffs that vanish just as quickly as each whispered word. They glance at you when they think you will not see. They glance at your master when he checks the beam's crossbar, runs his palm along the rope's weight where it hangs in the hush between sky and stone. You watch them all, not with anger, nor pride, nor any sharp feeling at all, only with the quiet knowing that they are part of the hush, too. Without their eyes, their held breaths, their soft steps that circle the scaffold at dawn, the rope would be only rope, the blade only steel, the ledger only ink pressed into parchment yellowing in the dark. There is no cheer when the hush settles in fully, no drum beats, no trumpet call, just the slow shift of feet, the subtle folding of arms across chests, the faint scrape of boots against stone as the square finds its place. A crow calls from a chimney pot, harsh cry cutting through the murmurs before fading into silence again. Sometimes a figure will stand alone at the far edge, a man whose coat is too thin for the cold, or a woman whose hands are hidden deep inside her sleeves as if pressing prayers into her palms. They watch without speaking, faces pale in the half-light, eyes locked, not on the rope or the blade, but on something further, some hush they alone carry home when the square empties again. And you stand quietly among them all, yet apart, the coil of rope in your hands, brushing your coat's rough sleeve. You feel the hush wrap around you, a circle drawn not by chalk, but by the simple press of 100 held breaths. When the master steps forward, boots heavy on timber, you feel the crowd lean as one, a soft sigh, a single shape made of many voices, held tight behind closed lips. They come to witness, not for thrill, but for order. They come because the hush must be seen to hold. They come because the square remembers what happens when the hush slips loose, and no one stands steady with rope, blade, and quiet ink to bind it back again. When the work is done, the crowd breaks apart like mist in early sun, boots scuffing straw into drifts that catch on the scaffold's lowest steps. The hush scatters with them, carried down lanes and into doorways, where warm bread waits, where gossip softens into murmurs that fade when the hearth fire's crackle drowns them out. But here, beneath the beam, now empty once more, the hush lingers, and you, the apprentice, stand alone again, with the rope coiled back over your arm, a soft promise that when the square gathers next, it will find you waiting, boots planted steady, eyes calm, ready to hold the hush once more. There are days when the hush grows heavy before dawn ever touches the rooftops, days when the square seems to wake before the first footstep falls, as if the stones themselves remember what is about to come. You stand at the scaffold's base, boots brushing through fresh straw, scattered to soften the sound of feet and voices gathering in the cold gray light. Slowly they come, not all at once, but in ones and twos and quiet knots of whispers that slip through the narrow lanes and alleyways leading to the square. A shopkeeper, apron still dusted with flour from the morning's first loaf, a stable boy, cheeks pink from the chill, breath fogging in soft clouds that vanish as quickly as they appear, an old man leaning on a carved stick, his free hand pressed to his chest as if to steady a heartbeat that remembers more hushes than he will ever say aloud. They stand close, but not too close, careful to keep a few steps distance from the scaffold's base. Some cross their arms tight against the cold, eyes downcast until the soft crunch of straw shifts them to look up at the rope hanging silent above. A hush passes between them in small glances and small nods, each face saying, "Yes, I see," though no one names what they see aloud. You stand still, rope looped over your shoulder, hands steady at your sides. You know some of these faces well enough to recognize the slope of a brow, the way a scarf is tied just so against the wind. You know which ones will look away quickly, and which will watch too long before their gaze slides down to the stones at their feet. Some stand at the very edge of the crowd, half hidden behind a wagon's broken wheel or the corner of a market stall left empty for this hour. They come not because they wish to watch, but because not watching feels worse. To shut the door, to bar the window, to pretend the hush does not belong to them too. A butcher with sleeves rolled up to his elbows murmurs to the farmer standing just behind him. Their words drift across the hush in thin threads of sound that vanish the moment you turn your head. An apprentice from the cooper's yard shifts from boot to boot, the leather creaking softly with each nervous sway. His breath drifts upward, catching the faint gleam of dawn that slips through the square's edges. Near the far side, a pair of old women stand shoulder to shoulder. One clutches a small string of wooden beads hidden in the fold of her glove. Her lips move around a prayer meant only for the hush to hear, words slipping like breath through teeth, half forgotten, beneath the heavy beam, in the hush just before the rope takes its final shape. There is always a moment that hangs softer than the rest, a space where words drift into the cold air like breath, half heard, half held, then gone. Imagine yourself standing just behind your master, boots planted on the scaffold's planks, still damp with dawn's breath. The rope rests ready, its loop curled gently over your arm, its weight familiar but never quite ordinary. Before you stands the one who must leave the condemned, as the ledger names them, but more than just ink on parchment in this hush. Their shoulders shift as they stand at the edge, a slow rise and fall, a soft tremor that hums through worn cloth, through the soles of boots that scuff faintly against the planks. You see the small signs that never make the ledger's page, a thumb rubbing the corner of a sleeve, eyes lifted once to the pale sky as if searching for a bird that might carry some final thought away. Sometimes he only lays a steady hand on a shoulder that trembles once, then stills. If there are words left to say, they come here at this edge, where hush and breath meet for the last time. Some speak them, aloud names murmured into the gray morning, words soft as frost melting on the beam above. A promise to someone waiting at home, a prayer pressed through cracked lips, a single word, forgive, remember. Goodbye floating into the hush like a wisp of smoke that fades before it reaches the sky. Others stand silent, eyes finding yours for a heartbeat before slipping away. You learn to read what is left unsaid, the soft slump of shoulders, when fear gives way to something heavier. The quiet press of heels against the plank, as if to feel the solid wood one last time before the hush claims it all. You, the apprentice, do not speak. Your words belong to rope and timber and the small, careful knots that make the hush true. But inside, you hold their final moments gently, as if they were embers cupped between your palms, warm only for a breath, then fading into the soft drift of smoke that clings to the scaffold's frame when the square empties once more. Sometimes a friend or kin stands near the steps, held back by the guard's quiet arms. They do not shout, they do not weep aloud. Their grief hums low in the hush, folded into the straw, scattered at the scaffold's foot. If they lift a hand, it is half hidden in the fold of a cloak or the curve of a sleeve, a small farewell that drifts between them and the beam above, as weightless as the mist rising off the square's stones. When the hush deepens to its final shape, you watch your master check the rope, test the knot, lay his hand once more on the wood's cold edge. You feel the silence press against your ribs, heavy, patient, inevitable. You see the last breath drawn, the last word mouthed for no one but the hush itself. And when the rope does its work, when the final sigh settles through the timber and down into the stones below, the words are gone, carried into the ledger's page as a line of ink, carried into your memory as a soft echo you do not repeat, not even when you wake in the hush of your narrow loft. Long after the square sleeps again, you gather the rope back in silence, coil it neat as a promise against your chest. You feel the hush slip away from the beam like mist dissolving at dawn. The townsfolk drift apart behind you. The ledger waits on your master's table. The hush folds the words away. Last words, final moments, unspoken farewells that linger only in the breath between rope and sky. There is a hush that comes when the rope is ready, but not yet drawn tight. A hush so soft it seems the square itself holds its breath alongside the one who stands on the scaffold's edge. In that hush, you stand just behind your master, the rope draped over your arm like a small weight you dare not shift. You have learned to see the small moments others miss, the flutter of a hand that lifts, then drops, the way a mouth works around a word that will never fully form. You notice how eyes search the edge of the square, the rooftops, the sky above the beam, as if trying to find somewhere to send this final thought, this last piece of breath that must leave before the rope claims the rest. Your master keeps his voice low. He leans close. If he speaks, it is only a handful of words, not for the townsfolk below, not for you, not for the ledger waiting in the quiet workroom, but for the one who stands at the scaffold's edge. Sometimes there are no words at all, just the faint brush of a hand against a shoulder, a nod so slight you might think you imagined it if you hadn't seen the hush settle deeper in the space between them. You see the many shapes this final moment can take. Some stand stiff and still, chin lifted, breath drawn so deep it trembles the rope before it ever tightens. Some weep in silence, tears slipping along a cheek so pale the dawn's chill seems to settle there for good. Some smile, a small, soft thing that flickers and fades in the hush before it has time to warm the cold beam above. A name might slip from their mouth, a wife, a brother, a child not yet grown tall enough to stand where the crowd waits beyond the straw. Sometimes it's a plea, sometimes it's an apology, shaped more by the hush than by the voice that gives it shape. More often it's only breath, a puff of mist caught in the first pale sun, rising into the sky above the rope's waiting curve. You stand close enough to hear it all, yet far enough that none of it truly belongs to you. You keep your hands steady. You hold the rope's twist tight. You remind yourself, as you were taught, that this is the shape the hush must take, words drawn into air, silence wrapped around them, timber and rope holding it all until the hush does its work. Sometimes the condemned turns not fully, just enough for their eyes to meet yours. You feel that look like a small weight pressed to your chest, not blame, not even fear, but the quiet understanding that here, in this hush, you stand witness, that you will keep this last word safe in the back of your mind. When the ledger's page holds only a line of ink where no voice lives. You see, too, the ones who linger near the steps, a sister's hand pressed to her mouth, a friend's head bowed low enough that his breath catches in the folds of his coat. They do not call out, though sometimes you see a word on their lips, shaped for no ears but their own. Farewell, forgive, wait for me. Words carried by the hush into the rough beams above your head. caught there like old breath, waiting to drift free when the rope's promise is kept. There are moments when your master steps aside to give the condemned a breath of space. In that small space, when the crowd's last footstep fades beyond the square's edge, when the final hush settles like a soft cloth over timber and stone, the work is not yet done. If the scaffold wakes the square, it must also be allowed to sleep again, and it falls to you to guide it back to silence, piece by careful piece. The damp air tastes faintly of old smoke, the ghost of breath that lingers after 100 watchers have gone. You gather your tools first, a coarse broom with bristles bound tight with old cord, a wooden bucket half filled with water drawn from the yard's pump, a rag so worn at the edges it feels soft as old parchment in your hands. These are the quieter tools of your craft, the ones that carry no weight in the ledger but hold the hush steady just the same. You begin with the straw. Each sweep of the broom sends a soft hiss across the boards, over the stones beneath your boots. You push the scattered drifts into a neat pile at the scaffold's base, careful not to stir dust too high into the air, where the morning's hush might carry it back into the square's empty corners. The wood remembers. You see it in the faint marks left by boots that paused one last time. You feel it in the small scratches where rope brushed beam, so you kneel beside the post, rag dipped into the cool bucket, and wipe the grain clean in slow, steady circles. The water runs cloudy after the first few passes, so you pause, tip it away into the earth, where the hush seeps down and disappears. Small tears in the wood that could catch a soul or fray the rope if left untended. You run your thumb along the edge, feel for anything sharp, then press a bit of rough cloth to rub it smooth again, a simple fix, but enough to remind the timber it must stand ready for the hush to gather again when called. He says nothing. He watches as you lift the broom again, sweep away the last bits of straw that cling in corners where dawn's shadows linger longest. A nod, soft and slow, and he turns away, trusting the hush to your hands. You coil the length once more, guiding each twist into its circle, laying the hemp flat and smooth so no hidden fray waits to betray your next dawn's hush. The chest's lid closes with a low creak, the rope's soft breath folded away in darkness until the square remembers it again. The joints at the scaffold's base to test for looseness after bearing so much hush pressed down in silence. A mallet taps each peg, steady and calm, the sound carrying no threat, only promise that the boards will hold when they must hold again. Sometimes you pause, leaning on the broom's rough handle, breath slipping out in a soft cloud that fades above the stones. You stand there in the empty square, hearing only the wind brushing through the narrow lanes, a distant dog barking once before the hush folds it away, part of the silence that lives in rope and wood and the gentle press of water over old stains. When the last sweep is done, the bucket empty, the broom's bristles tapped clean against the yard's low wall, you gather your tools and step back. You check the steps once more for loose planks, run your palm along the beam above your head. The scaffold stands ready now, not awake, but not asleep either, waiting, always waiting. The hush drifts with you like a soft cloak, the small comfort that comes not from rope or blade, but from this quiet care, this slow return to stillness that makes the square whole again when dawn's hush calls it back. When the broom rests against the yard's low wall, and the rope sleeps coiled in its chest, the hush does not vanish altogether. It drifts through the square like a pale ghost, slipping beneath shutters and doors, curling into corners where firelight flickers low against stone. Imagine the town's narrow lanes at dusk, soft lanterns glowing behind cracked glass, the scent of stew drifting out through half-open windows. The scaffold stands empty in the dark, its beams a shadow among shadows, yet its weight hums through the air just the same. Inside the tavern, voices gather, not loud, not brash, but low, spoken just above the crackle of the hearth, just beneath the hush that clings to the corners of the room. You stand at the edge of this hush sometimes, boots damp from the yard, hands raw from broom and rope. You lean near the door as you listen, hearing how your trade shapes itself into rumor when warmth and ale loosen careful tongues. A cooper's apprentice tilts his mug, voice drifting toward a small circle of nodding heads. "Did you hear," he says, "how the condemned bowed his head at the end, how he whispered a name no one else knew?" Someone leans closer, breath warm with barley and stories half remembered. "My cousin says he saw the rope sway twice." Another voice murmurs, like the wind, wouldn't let the hush hold. "None speak your name aloud. None speak your master's either, not fully, not directly, but they speak of the rope, the blade, the hush that gathers beneath timber and straw. They shape it into a thing bigger than wood and iron, a small mystery wrapped in the ordinary. Elsewhere, in small kitchens and back rooms behind shuttered shops, stories bend softer. A mother folds a blanket over a child's small shoulders, her voice weaving quiet tales meant to hush restless questions. "Sleep now," she says. "Mind your chores, come dawn, and don't stray too near the square when the mist sits low." Her voice smooths the edges of what the scaffold truly holds, shaping fear into order, turning hush into a warning that keeps small feet close to doorsteps when dawn comes gray and cold. Some rumors drift further than they should. A market boy claims he saw the apprentice. You slip silver into a beggar's palm behind the tannery. A washerwoman swears she glimpsed a hidden mark on the scaffold's beam, carved deep where only the rope would see it. These stories twist the hush into something more than it is, spinning timber and rope into secret signs and half-true charms against bad luck. And yet you know the truth. You know the hush does not belong to rumor alone. It lives in your hands, in the broom's soft scrape across old straw, in the slow sweep of sand across fresh ink on the ledger's page. The stories soften the edges, but they do not carry the rope's real weight. That part belongs only to you, the master, and the hush that binds the square each dawn it wakes. Still, you do not despise these stories. You let them drift past your boots as you stand at the tavern's door, warmth brushing your sleeves where the night's damp clings. You know they bind the townsfolk closer to the scaffold's promise. Remind them that the hush holds, not just by rope or blade, but by the quiet fear that settles between the hearth and the shutter when the wind rattles the latch. When the last mug is drained, when the fire sinks low and the last words slip into sleep, you step back into the lane. The hush follows you like a soft echo. Rumor turned quiet again. Stories fading into the mist that curls around your boots as you cross the square once more. You lift your eyes to the scaffold's shadow, feel the rope's shape coiled in its chest behind the workroom door, and know that tomorrow the stories will stir again, half true, half forgotten, always wrapped in the hush that never fully sleeps. When the scaffold sleeps and the rope is tucked away beneath its wooden lid, the hush does not vanish. It seeps into the stones underfoot, curls into the beams above narrow lanes, drifts beneath the doors that keep the cold at bay. When night gathers close around the town's crooked roofs, you stand at the edge of this hush sometimes, boots damp from the yard's last sweep, sleeves brushed clean of straw, but still smelling faintly of old rope and oil. You slip through the narrow lanes that wind away from the square's dark heart, listening for the small shape of your craft, reborn in rumor and half-true tales. Inside the tavern, warmth spills from the doorway, brushing your face like the hush's softer twin. Voices rise in low waves, never sharp, never loud enough to wake the hush fully, but strong enough to bend it into stories that ripple from mug to mug. A smith's apprentice leans close to the hearth, flicking ash from his cuff as he shapes the hush into a tale fit for the glow of embers. "I heard," he says, "the apprentice ties 3 knots instead of 2. One for the law, one for the town, and one for the hush itself." Another nods, pushing his empty mug along the table's scarred grain. "My uncle swears he saw the master lay a coin beneath the scaffold's post. For luck, he says, for a clean hush." No one knows the truth of it, yet no one truly wants it plain. The stories soften the rope's bite, make the hush something small enough to sip alongside warm ale and the drift of smoke that curls around bent shoulders. Near the back, in a shadowed corner where the light does not quite reach, an old man mutters into his cup. "Back in my day," he says to no one in particular, "the hush was thicker. You could feel it in your teeth when you walked past the scaffold in the dawn. Now they sweep it to clean." He taps the rim of his mug as if to chase the hush back into his mouth before it escapes altogether. Elsewhere, beyond the tavern's hum, the hush slides beneath doorframes and into small kitchens where mothers bend over rough tables to patch worn sleeves. Here, the hush is shaped into softer caution, a story told in whispers as children doze near the warmth of the hearth. "Mind the square," a mother murmurs, smoothing a blanket over a half-open mouth, "and never speak the rope's name when the wind blows from the east." That's when the hush listens. The older children know better than to ask too many questions. They press their small fears into the pillow's edge, eyes drifting shut while the hush settles deeper in the beams above their heads. They dream when the broom rests in its corner, when the rope sleeps coiled beneath the lid of its chest, when the last ember in the workroom's hearth sighs out into the hush. Then you climb the narrow steps to your loft, boots brushing each worn riser where your feet pass the same path night after night. Your bed is simple, a rough blanket, a straw-stuffed mattress that shifts under your weight. A low beam runs just above your head, a splintered edge you have traced more times than you could count. Here, the hush you keep for the square folds itself around you like an old cloak, softer than rope, lighter than timber. You lie on your side, eyes half open in the dark. The hush drifts through the rafters above you, a quiet breath that hums low against the walls. You feel it settle in your ribs, warm where your hand rests against your chest. Your dreams come slowly, wrapped in the same silence you tend each dawn. Sometimes you see the rope uncoiled, stretching away into the mist where the square waits, empty and endless. You see the beam above, its grain pale in moonlight that drifts through a window not quite your own. You reach for the knot, not to tie it, not to test its hold, but to feel the rough twist slip between your fingers like old cloth. Other nights, the scaffold does not come at all. You dream, instead of quiet things, a whetstone resting cool against your palm, the soft rasp of a broom sweeping straw in slow circles that never end. The hush fills these dreams so completely that you wake sometimes still tasting the faint sweetness of clean timber, still hearing the soft sigh of rope laid down gentle and true. When the dreams turn heavier, they do so without cruelty. You feel the hush pressing closer then, the weight of names written neat in the ledger, the press of boots across the scaffold's damp planks, the final breath that slips through your sleep as if it seeks your ear before it drifts into the square's stones. Yet even these dreams do not frighten you. They remind you that your hush is never truly left behind, that your hands carry it, whether they hold the rope, the broom, or the quill's fine edge. It lives in your breath, your heartbeat, the slow shift of your shoulder beneath the blanket when you roll to your other side. Sometimes, half awake in the hush, just before dawn, you feel the old timber beam above your head hum with memories you never saw. The master's master rising before you. Boots on the same steps, rope coiled across a shoulder, now long forgotten by any ledger's page. You drift there, neither fully asleep nor fully waking, part of the hush that binds you to each quiet name you never spoke aloud, but still keep close under your ribs. Outside, the square breathes, the stones settle in the frost. A dog pads across an alley where the hush follows his soft paws into shadow. Somewhere, a door creaks against a shifting wind. A rumor curls into someone's pillow, half-formed words shaped in dreams that will soften by the time the hearth is stoked come morning. And you drift deeper beneath your rough blanket. Boots left neatly by your bedside, palms curled loose against your chest. The hush tucks itself beneath your breath like straw beneath the scaffold's legs, soft, patient, waiting. You sleep, and the square sleeps with you, the rope waiting in its chest, the blade resting silent in its cloth, the hush folding everything into quiet dreams that keep the night whole until dawn calls you back again. When the square drifts into its deepest sleep, when no footstep echoes across its stones, when no whisper clings to its corners, the rope waits, coiled beneath the lid of its chest, its twist laid neat by your careful hands. It rests there as surely as your own breath rests in your chest while you sleep above it. You lie in your loft, blanket pulled close, boots set side by side just inside the door. Outside your shutter, the night hums, soft and slow, the faint rustle of wind along the yard wall, the quiet sigh of a stray dog curling into straw behind a stable door. Somewhere, a hinge creaks and settles. Then, silence folds over it again, like a warm hand pressing hush back into place. Below you, the rope dreams its own soft dream. It carries no fear, no rumor, no restless echo of voices drifting through the tavern's glow. It knows only waiting, patient, steady, certain that when dawn lifts its pale face over the square once more, your boots will step true, your hands will lift the coil, your eyes will check the beam above for any flaw that might let the hush slip loose. The scaffold sleeps with it, its planks dry from your careful scrubbing, its pegs wedged tight beneath timber you brushed clean when the last crowd drifted home. It stands in the dark like any ordinary frame of wood, but the hush it holds belongs to you, to your master, to every quiet breath drawn in the square when rope and stone and story gather at dawn. The ledger rests, too, pages pressed shut, names hidden in their nest of ink and sand. They dream nothing now, yet you know they wait for your next line, your next careful scratch of quill, to remind the hush that it never forgets, not truly, not while your hands hold steady. And you drift at last, caught between sleep and the soft weight of your craft. You feel the hush settle under your ribs like a second breath, warm and patient. You know tomorrow you will sweep again, scrub straw from cracks, test the rope's twist in your palm until it hums with trust. Yet for now, the hush asks nothing more of you. It holds your dreams in its broad, quiet hands. It steadies the square's stones so no rumor stirs too loud before dawn. It keeps the rope wrapped soft and ready, waiting for the next name, the next measured drop, the next hush to gather where boots scuff timber in the cold morning mist. You breathe once more, a soft exhale that drifts through the beams, brushing the rope's resting place like a promise folded into sleep. The scaffold stands still, the rope waits, the hush holds, and you, the apprentice, slip deeper beneath your blanket, boots forgotten, breath gentle and true, keeper of the hush, even here in your dreams. The square sleeps on, the rope waits, and the hush keeps its promise, silence enough to carry you softly through the night, until the scaffold stirs again under a pale, patient dawn.